get started. So welcome everyone, bienvenidos. Please remember to mute yourself whenever you are not speaking. All slides and links referenced in this webinar will be sent out as we normally do, along with the recording and the PowerPoint presentation in the December edition of the Light Center PD2Go newsletter. They will also, of course, be available on Spoke under the resources section. So welcome to the very last session of 2022. Welcome to the Light Center Holiday Webinar, Teaching Empathy and Resilience in the Higher Education Classroom. Empathy is the ability to recognize another person's feelings and to respond accordingly and respectfully. Empathy is important because it helps learners be resilient through developing strong and supportive relationships. This 1 hour holiday webinar will explore the concept of empathy and how it can assist students to understand another's emotions in relation to their own. Today's facilitator is Mary Scholl. She's a very dear friend of mine who I met in Venezuela as we toured the country, training hundreds of English language teachers. I am so happy that she's here with us today because she embodies what she teaches all over the world: kindness, empathy, and love from one another, especially love for our students. Professor Scholl is the executive director at the Institute of Collaborative Learning in Costa Rica. She's located in Costa Rica right now, and is also a facilitator at the Center for Holding Space and Senior Academic Consultant at National Geographic Learning Latin America. Captivated for many years by the countries and cultures of Central and South America, longtime English language specialist Mary Scholl made Costa Rica her permanent home in 2001, and 10 years later founded Centro Espiral Maná, recently renamed the Institute for Collaborative Learning, which offers a broad spectrum of English language teacher training programs to educators from all over the world, as well as workshops in leadership, development, organizational planning, and more. Mary not only runs the Institute, in which there are more than 2,000 teachers that have graduated from the TESOL certificate course, but she also works with Peace Corps volunteers, access teachers, and community leaders, and as specialists, has trained educators both in country and online in different countries in Central and South America, such as Brazil, Costa Rica, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, and of course, my beloved Venezuela. So what an honor to have you here, Mary, with us. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that sweet introduction. You did your research. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Oh my goodness, Nicolas, that sounds really cold. Where are you? Wow. I am joining from Costa Rica. I've been living here, as Evelyn said, I've been living here for over 20 years and working here and in the region. And I'd love to hear where you're joining us from. If you want to write in the chat, if you feel comfortable doing that, please do. Let us know where you're calling in from. This is quite an interesting and diverse group. I'm excited to be with you. I have been teaching for over 30 years. Actually, before I start that, I would like to do one of our arrival activities or tasks that we like to do with people in our sessions, both online and also when we're face-to-face. And it's just a welcoming. And I'm going to read this for us. And then I'm also going to invite you to add in afterwards if there's anything else that you would like to welcome. And I think you'll get a sense of it. We do this to build up, to give us a little bit of time to transition from wherever you are to here. And also, we want to create a sense of belonging. I want you to know that you're welcome and that you belong by being here in whatever way you've shown up. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, teachers, administrators, learners. Welcome, everyone who's hungry. And welcome, everyone who's eaten or is eating, because this is a webinar. You might be at home. You might be at a place you can eat. And I hope you feel comfortable to eat and drink as you need to. Welcome, everyone who's tired and everyone who has energy. Welcome everyone who might be feeling a little angry right now or upset about something. And welcome everyone who feels happy or content. Welcome everyone who feels lonely or disconnected. And welcome everyone who has a sense of belonging and connection with people. Welcome everyone who's eager to learn. And welcome everybody who already knows. If you already know this, that's great. Welcome everyone who wants to learn about resilience and empathy, and everyone who already knows about resilience and empathy. I want to say welcome everyone who is, if you're finishing up an academic semester and getting that done, welcome everyone who's feeling that energy of finishing up. And welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. And if you'd like to add any, you can write it in the chat. Thank you. Christy says, welcome everyone who have dogs on their laps. And yes, Christy, I have dogs on my feet, actually.
Mine's very tiny. He's a Chihuahua, so he's in my lap.
Welcome everyone who feels cold. Yes. Oh my goodness. And Nicholas, you might win the prize for that. Welcome from Ice Station Zebra. I don't know.
It's a reference from an old movie.
Oh, gotcha. Thanks.
A very, very cold storyline.
Oh,
Yeah, it was with Rock Hudson. He was a submarine commander.
That's the one.
I love it. I love it.
It's fantastically cold here.
Where is it that you are, Nicholas?
I'm. You've heard of the steppes of Russia. I'm in the steppes of Wyoming. I'm in central Wyoming, just in my hometown. It's about 2 hours south of the Bighorns and the Wind Rivers, and where all of the really, really pretty parts of Wyoming are. I'm out here in between two mountains and visiting my parents and enjoying every minute of it. My father and I went out and did the hot water up into the air thing, boiling water into the minus to watch it immediately turn to vapor.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So good. Well, thank you for taking some time to join us today.
Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, bueno. Yeah, from people from California and Texas and Turkey, Florida, Utah, UC Irvine, California. That's wonderful. Knoxville, Tennessee. Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. We have another 50 minutes or so. And I have a lot more than we're actually going to go over today, but I wanted to create a slide deck that might be useful to you in a number of ways. So one thing that you're going to notice is there'll be slides that I'm going to skip over, but you'll get them. And if that's a slide of interest to you, you can always go back to it. I want to share just a little bit about myself. I am Mary Scholl. I'm originally from upstate New York, and that's a picture of the house that I grew up in with snow and a picture of me as a little girl with my mother. I grew up outside of Rochester, New York. And but then afterwards, after I became a teacher, I taught in Japan for 8 years. And then I went to Brazil and I did a school change project in Brazil for 2 years before coming to Costa Rica. And I've been working in Costa Rica ever since. I run a small center for professional development for educators and community leaders. And we just renamed ourselves recently the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And we're located in the middle of nowhere, Costa Rica. So I can relate to Wyoming or to you, Evelyn, where you're out in the middle of nowhere. I live on a farm that's about 2 kilometers or just over a mile from a small village of 500 people. And we're about 30 minutes from a touristy town and 45 minutes from a small city. And I'm so grateful to have internet that I can actually sit on my front porch and be with you all. I think that's pretty darn amazing. I work mostly with teachers. I do a lot of work with teacher development with my team at the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And we do a lot of work online. We've also been working online since 2015, I guess, so before the pandemic. But the pandemic has certainly given us a lot more online time. So the theme for today, which is near and dear to my heart, is about resilience and empathy. And I decided to shift to focus a little bit on resilience and then include empathy. Because I think I'm curious to learn for you all, but I think resilience is an issue for all of us in education now. As the world has shifted, as our student population has shifted, and starting to really understand what resilience is and how do we cultivate it, I think is a really important part of being an educator. So this idea of resilience, being able to recover from setbacks or difficulties or face our challenges and fears. So the idea that I can bounce back, that's hope, assuming that I had a place of firmness and stability, that I can bounce back. It's really developing my ability to tolerate discomfort, which could relate to failure, could relate to fear, could relate to certain emotions that come up. But resilience, it's definitely a hot topic in K-12, but I also think it's an important topic at university level. And I'm curious that later on we'll have a little bit more time for some Q&As. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your experiences with resilience. And I also just want to mention, it's not just for our students, it's for ourselves as well. I think we're human. We don't always remember that, but we are human. And as a human being, we have to deal with fear. We have to deal with failure. We have to deal with setbacks and challenges and discomfort. So how do we do that? What do we do with that in our personal but in our professional lives as well? And I think that's something that's not always spoken about in our it's definitely usually spoken about in our meetings. So I thought it was really wonderful to be able to bring this to you all today. So resilience is actually a very common quality. It's actually not rare. We just by the fact that you're here today shows me that you have a degree of resilience in you. So it's, I might be sharing things with you that you already know and that you've already seen in yourself. I love this idea that Dr. Maston shares with us, that it's actually ordinary magic. It comes from our normal everyday capabilities. It's what I think it's how we teach ourselves to be a fully functioning adult. If we are really a fully functioning. Brene Brown, who's done a lot of interesting work on social and emotional lives, says resilience is more available to people who are curious. And so one of the big things I like to talk about and think about is what is it how can I shift my stance? If I'm in a stance of being convinced and knowing, how can I shift into curiosity? And that is going to help me become more resilient. And I'm going to share with you all today 6 science-based strategies to build resilience. And a lot of them come from, have you all heard of the Center for the Institute for Greater Good in Berkeley? I see maybe a couple heads nodding, but it's an interesting institute, the Greater Good Science Center. They do research, they promote research on positive psychology and looking at what are the things that we do that help us be stronger in our social emotional world. So there's 6 of them. We don't actually have time, I don't think, to go through all 6. I'll see where we're at. I might sort of skip through some of them fairly quickly, but you'll have the slides for them. And knowing, I would imagine that that you might feel more attraction to one of these and less attraction to some of them too. It's not about doing everything all the time. It's about this is it's options that we have. And so my hope would be that if anything, that at the end of this hour, there's something here that you say, oh, I think I'd like to learn more about that for myself, or I think I'd like to learn more about that for how I interact with my students, right? So that would be my hope. And yeah, Nicholas, you mentioned Knowles, the Knowles organization. Yeah, it's a leadership development organization. Teaches a lot of this kind of resilience strategies. Absolutely. I think if more people could take the course that Nicholas mentioned in the chat, really is all about being resilient a very experiential way of learning resilience. So the first area of building resilience is looking to others as examples and finding inspiration in other people's stories. And to do this, just knowing and understanding what are the main characteristics of a resilient person, right? What does it take for you to be resilient? And so if you look at these right now, these 7 characteristics, which ones do you feel like you are most able to do? Which ones do you feel like you're least able to do? You want to just pop it in the chat, or your students. If you want to think about yourself, great. If you want to think about your students. So what are your, so either one, which ones do you feel like you're most capable of, or your students are most capable of? Which ones do you feel like you are least capable of, or your students are least capable of right now? And if 1 or 2 people want to unmute and speak, wonderful. Or if you want to write in the chat, that's great too. Yeah, Sama.
Can I speak? Yeah. I would say F for myself, because I mean, I've been teaching for many, many years, but ever since the first day I entered a class, I don't know, it just clicked. And I have been motivated and it hasn't changed. Yeah. Wherever I go, I mean, it could be California, it could be Turkey, it could be somewhere on the planet. I don't know. I just love being in front of people and connecting with them. So for me, motivation and optimism, I think I have a lot of that, because things can go wrong, like in COVID time. And, you know, you have to change billion things. Of course, I was very afraid because, you know, technology, I'm not a person who is best in technology, but I have to learn. But I was optimistic, and yeah, I mean, self-control, sometimes I may not have that, but I mean, I have my weaknesses, but motivated and optimism, I think, and, you know, I can kind of empathize with students, not always, but I mean, I make an effort to do that. So that would be my numbers.
Great, thanks, Emma. And I see Dr. Bruton also says that she's also motivated, and we see people mentioning being calm while under stress, and empathy and self-control as well. I put in a few slides of a few leaders that I think really show high degrees of resilience. I think Malala is definitely somebody out there that we could look to. Nelson Mandela is also somebody that we can look to. If you want to look into history, Harriet Tubman is also somebody that I would look to as a leader who showed amazing resilience. One of the things that I think as an instructor or professor in higher education, I think that you can share stories about people who are resilient with your students in whatever area you're teaching. There's always going to be somebody. Or if you wanted to take somebody that you think is resilient that's outside of your subject area, but that you think might be useful for your students to hear about. I think those stories are really one of the most powerful ways I think we can raise our students' awareness of who else is resilient, and to talk about these characteristics with them. Right? I'm going to scoot ahead just because I want to get into a few other areas, but there is a slide here with resources for finding inspiring young people. And of course, I made a little assumption here, which may or may not be true. Your students might be of all ages. Although I think young people can inspire people of older ages. They certainly inspire me for sure. But I think that's finding and mentioning and talking about resilient people that inspire us can have a huge impact. The second strategy for building resilience is really working on changing our narrative and our stories that we tell ourselves. So the idea that we ruminate, right? We engage in these repetitive thoughts, that go in our mind that don't usually get resolved, right? So there's no end or completion to them. It's rumination. So how do we shift out of ruminating mind and into flow and finding insights? Right? And that is, I'm curious, like, what do your students ruminate on? Or what do you and your colleagues ruminate on? And then what do you do about it? How do you hold that experience of rumination? And one of the things I often do when I am ruminating on something is I stop and say, wait a minute, what's the story I'm telling myself? These are just my thoughts. Right? What's the story I'm telling myself? And then I say, the story I'm telling myself is, and it gives me, just saying that sentence stem helps me have one step away. So let's say I'm sitting in class and I'm teaching a class and no student is answering. I ask a question and everybody just sits there. And I might start to ruminate. Oh my God, they don't know it. These students are so bad. Or what's wrong with me that I can't reach my students? Or, I can start all these thoughts going in my head. So what's the story I'm telling myself? And how can I recognize that story and then shift it or change it? So I'm a little curious. Are there certain things in your classrooms that students tend to ruminate on that come up or impact their learning or impact for you? Is there something you ruminate on that impacts your teaching that you'd be willing to share? Thank you, Dr. Howe. Notice students ruminating on large projects or assignments. They tell themselves they can't do it because it's so overwhelming. And your solution is to offer to not look at the entire grand staircase, so step by step. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah. Anybody else? What's something that your students ruminate on?
I ruminate on the fact that since such a large number of my students are not native English speaking, it's trying to come up with ways to get them to engage in the conversation in class, because they give you these really short, like 3-word answers, and you come up with all these ideas to try and prod them to say more, and it's like crickets. You're like, that. I spend a lot of time thinking about that. How do I get them to speak more when they're so self-aware that English isn't their first language? They'd rather just sit quiet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the story you're telling yourself is maybe I'm guessing here, is it that because English isn't their first language, the way they're participating, that they're more hesitant to participate?
Right. So I'm constantly trying to figure out other ways to get them to participate. I use the chat a lot because they feel safer to type things than to embarrass themselves by mispronouncing something or not having the right word in English, that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Christy. Yeah, that is so common. And it's that brings up an interesting way of like this, when I think about the story that I'm telling myself, then it leads me to try different techniques, different strategies, and sometimes also thinking about what's the let's see here. We got 2 activities. What did I have? I'm missing a slide I was thinking I was having. Just what is that story and what can it tell me? And I have a couple of activities that I am going to jump over, but if you feel like that's something that you want to work on, I mean, it sounds like you're ruminating. It sounds like you're doing more problem solving than ruminating, to be honest with you. Which is, rumination is when I can't stop thinking about it and it's interrupting my flow and ability to really be present, right? And if that's happening, then expressive writing, where you sit down and you just write what's important to you, to just get it out of you on some level, can help shift the story on some level. Because if I do really expressive flow writing and I don't monitor my thinking, sometimes ideas pop out that wouldn't pop out if I'm just sitting and thinking. Right? So that is one activity that I use for changing my story and thinking about my narrative. And another Another task I like to do to work on changing my narrative to some degree is finding the silver linings. And I know this can sound trite, so I just want to put that out there. And at the same time, I think it can be really helpful. Like if we take this situation that Christy shared with us, my students are not feeling comfortable and safe to participate, or are not. My students are not participating actively with their voices in class.
Right.
There could be some interesting silver linings there. Maybe the written chat is something that's going to give you a different insight or a record that you could work with, or maybe using more breakout rooms in small groups. Really, I mean, that's a common technique that really helps language learners. So maybe as they participate in small groups, they'll have a chance to build up their confidence to share their voices. But taking some time to find what might be a silver lining, what might be a benefit. It doesn't. You can do some fantastical thinking here, some sort of magical thinking that sometimes we think is impossible, but then brings us closer to finding other ways of shifting and being able to open up and see things. So that is a second activity that I help build resilience. And Evelyn, do you mind just muting the person who's got their mic open? I don't have host power, but I would appreciate that. Thanks. So I'm just mentioning it there and this is an activity that does come out of the Greater Good Science Center that has some research attached to it that shows how it can help us shift perspectives. Jim writes some students ruminate on accents. So you break out in different accents to show where I'll talk to them. That's beautiful. Absolutely. Because I definitely think that students, and myself too, when I'm speaking in a different language, I feel a little bit shy to, especially when somebody's in the room that speaks that language better than I do. That I think, oh, I just want to defer to them saying whatever it is in the right way. So if you can use your power, as Jim's mentioning, to bring a playful atmosphere, that can certainly help shift the perspective and shift the narrative of the stories that they're telling them, the student might be telling themselves. Right? So I'm going to move ahead to, because I want to spend a little, there's a few resources here for changing the narrative that I put in here that you can find when you get the slides. A really good book on overcoming unwanted and intrusive thoughts. That's a sort of intentionally thinking and working on it. Another practice that has been proven to help shift out of rumination is gratitude. So that is something that could be brought into our classrooms. It's not, whatever the topic that I'm teaching, gratitude and asking students to take a minute or two to offer gratitude and think about what they're grateful for in that particular day will help shift and help build confidence and help shift the stories perhaps that they're telling themselves. Facing our fears. I'm curious too, what are some of the fears that your students have and how does that impact their learning? And then what are some of the fears that you or your colleagues have and how does that impact your teaching? Because when we think about building resilience, that's definitely an area that's something we don't usually talk about, right? It's a little weird to be talking about it sort of sometimes in our professional world because it's not the content that we're teaching, but it definitely impacts student learning and it impacts how we teach. So I'm sort of curious, is there anybody that would be willing to share something about your students' fears or some of your own?
Yes, I would like to, because we mentioned language. Yes, language is important and it's a component of culture, but more importantly is the culture of the students that affects them here in the United States. We say that the Asians are introspect and we are extrovert. They are introverts, we are extroverts. And in a way, we have that difference. And I would like to share also what my colleague told me. He was a superintendent in Orange County here in Irvine, and he went to take a class in UC Irvine, a cultural class. And at the end of the class, he confessed that he didn't learn only foreign cultures, but he started to see his own culture through the eyes of others. And I find this very quite important because the Asian students, they always wait to hear from the authority, from the professor. Unless we encourage them to speak and say things and we activate the process, we have difference. And that's all what I want to say.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I think language is part of it and culture is absolutely part of it. And we are in a position of dancing through this with our students. We want to honor who they are. We want to recognize their language, recognize the culture that they're bringing into our classroom. And in our classrooms, we're striving to create a culture of learning that has many people's individual cultures in it, but a culture of learning that really helps all of our students learn, right? So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jim, for mentioning that public speaking is always a top fear. Yeah. That sounds like a really interesting thing to learn about. Jim mentions that public speaking is a top fear, and I talk about it and explain how normal it is, and then give examples of what singers and top groups go through right before they going on stage. That's a beautiful example too of looking to a role model for inspiration, right? For becoming resilient and working with fear. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Mary, I want to add one more thing. I talk about my problems as well. I mean, not real problems, but like, for example, when I'm trying to learn tennis, I make all these errors and, you don't learn immediately. So what I teach is not going to result in learning immediately, but practice. And then I feel insecure. I just tell them, I don't know if this resonates with them. Some people understand, some people don't, but teacher is a human being. So if I show that I am vulnerable as well, I think it reduces their fears a little bit. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think by sharing your own humanity, Sema, you really give them a chance to be human too, right? Again, and coming back to what Peter is mentioning about cultures, it's interesting too. In some cultures, like a few years ago, I was working in Libya, doing some work with university professors in Libya, and I came with my ideas about creating a learning experience for these university professors, and which involves a lot of them speaking first and then me responding. I have a stance and a belief around teaching, actually following learning as well as leading learning. But they were like, no, Mary, we need to hear you first. So in our culture, you have to speak first. And so it's an interesting way of developing the culture of learning within our group for that particular moment, honoring, recognizing our cultural differences, and then also working together to create our new culture within our classroom, within the sessions that we're doing, that helps learning. There are a few stances, I think, that help us face our fears. And you were, Sema, you were mentioning that in terms of what you were saying is you're treating yourself kindly in relation to your fears, right? Recognizing that fear is a normal feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Sarah, you were also mentioning this and how you were working with your students and Jim as well. So recognizing it's normal, sit with it, explore it, but maybe not ruminate on it too much. Sometimes finding the benefits of past failures helps me move forward with my fear about future failures. So maybe in Sarah's situation, when you find the students ruminating on assignments, reminding them that they've done these big things in the past, or that when they haven't done where they had challenges in the past, what did they do to overcome them? How can that inform them here? And then when it seems like failure is possible, and where that fear is really coming up, how do we view it more as a challenge so it's not so overwhelming? The Greater Good Science Center gives us a few activities for thinking about, for tips for facing our fears. And I think that you mentioned some of them in terms of starting with small doses. I also think that scaffolding and staging throughout the semester or throughout the class, ways of recognizing small accomplishments can help people build up an ability to face their fears. I think sometimes in academia, some of the traditional paradigms of having a whole semester of learning and just one exam at the end, it's a huge, huge step, right? So how can we do things to lead up to success in that big step? And I'm going to give you an example from my life here in Costa Rica. My nephew is in medical school here in Costa Rica, and he just passed his boards, which I'm super excited about. His university, for him to have permission to take the big board exams, the big end of the whole medical school exams, they took a practice exam every month for a whole year. And they were not given permission to take the final boards unless they passed 2 or 3 of their practice exams. So it wasn't just one. They had to do it every month, and they had to pass many of them before they could actually take the final one. So even though it was one big final exam, right? There's nothing wrong with that one big comprehensive exam. There were steps that helped build up so that they weren't faced with this unknown fear about whether or not they were going to pass. They actually went in with a great deal of confidence of knowing that they had passed the practice exams multiple times. So I think that as professors, we can create strategies that help students face their fears in ways that help them overcome them. And I think there's some resources here as well about facing some of our fears that might be useful if that's an area that you'd like to explore. The number 4 is practicing self-empathy and self-compassion is something that I spend a lot of time doing. And I think, Evelyn, was probably what you were thinking most of when you were thinking about, when you called and said, let's do something. And I'm curious, when you see these words, pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion, what comes to mind for you? Are they all kind of the same thing? Is it very clear to you what they mean?
I personally see a big demarcation in even the words empathy versus sympathy. Empathy is feeling in. And I use the example, for instance, only a woman who has given birth can empathize with labor pains. If a woman hasn't given birth, she can't empathize it. And if a man says it, chances are he'll be murdered. But so that's different. We can never truly, unless you've experienced that, empathize with it. We can sympathize, which means feeling with. And if we understand that demarcation, it will help us, because for our students, for the most part, in most elements of it, we can't empathize, but we can sympathize. When we can empathize, we have a better connection point. And that's just that's just obviously just for the teaching scenarios. But if a student, if you grew up without parents, only you can empathize. Only somebody who has been in that position can truly empathize. You can't. It's very, in fact, condescending to say, "Well, I understand what it's like." No, you don't. You've never been in that situation. So I think that if we can cross that particular bridge better, and because people don't realize how tremendously condescending it sounds when someone says, "I can understand." When no, you don't. You can't. And that doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're evil. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean negative. I was in the Peace Corps as well, so I could see that being able to, and for instance, only someone who's in the Peace Corps can empathize what it's like to be in the Peace Corps. If you haven't, no, you don't know what it's like. And that doesn't mean you can't. Sympathy is a bad thing, but there is just a different level, being able to make better connections.
Sure. Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, David, about like we have certain understandings of these words. And if we understand them, we will know where we are in relation to others. And I want to share with you how I'm understanding these words now. And it's been really useful for me in the classroom for exactly what you're talking about, David, to understand where I am and what my limitations are and what my possibilities are in terms of this relational intelligence. This is, I don't have the reference on this. I will put the reference in here for this. This is an visual that I think has helped me a lot, thinking about pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion, and the amount of effort and understanding and engagement that it takes to engage in any of these. And as you can see, basically, the more effort, more understanding, more engagement I can progress through pity, empathy, sympathy, and compassion. I see pity as distancing. I'm distancing myself. If I'm pitying somebody, I'm looking down on them, and I'm not really connecting to what their needs are or what the situation is. Sympathy is a kind of awareness. I'm aware of that. Empathy is a kind of visceral or physical understanding of something, and compassion is action based on that empathetic awareness. This is how I'm using these definitions. So when
Can I add one point?
Sure, Peter, sure.
Yes, very good examples. I really like it. And what I would like to say, I give examples about empathy. For example, if I'm a manager, and if I have a good employee, but lately he's coming late, it would be better to go to his territory, to his office or her office, and ask them, well, you were a really very dedicated employee, but lately I'm detecting it. I'm detecting that you're not coming on time and your performance is not at the level that you were. Is there anything that I can help? Instead of calling me, him, or her to my office and tell them, okay, this is what you should do. You know that our working hours are 8 to 5 and so forth. Mm-hmm. If we are empathetic, we are sharing the position of our employees. Yeah. They can work together. And probably the man will say, oh, my son is sick and I have sleepless nights. He is terminally ill and so forth. And that could help greatly in our professional settings. So the empathy is, I believe, widely used in the professional settings, and we need it. And in another setting, another example is I had a boss that he was from Virginia, and he was telling us, okay, on Monday morning, maybe I might not be in a good mood. If my team loses on Sunday or over the weekend, I might not be in a good mood. So be careful when you come to me. I might not be in a good status. And we have to be empathetic as well with our bosses. If we see that they are angry, they have some anger, they have been very hardship. They have been experiencing hardships. And this is the example I would say about empathy. And I see it very important, even in the areas of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Peter. I appreciate that. It is, empathy it's a superpower. And it certainly transforms us, and it can transform many situations, which is why I really appreciate talking about this. So we talked about pity, where I feel sorry for someone and I distance myself. Sympathy is awareness, just simple awareness. And I might connect with your pain. I might see your pain. I might feel it, but it's through an awareness level. The definition that I'm using, or the practice I'm using with empathy, is that I'm striving to understand your experience. So I can't live the exact same experience that you've lived. I can live certain emotions that are similar to what you've lived. I can try and understand on that level without, like, I agree. I agree with you. Let's see, who was it that was sharing earlier? Is it Nicholas? But no, I think I can't remember. I've lost pictures on my screen. But maybe it was David. I can't say that I've lived the exact same experience. I can, though, try and understand. And it could be a visceral kind of empathy. It could be an intellectual kind of empathy. I definitely agree, though, that when someone says to you, "Oh, I understand you," that's like, that shuts me down. I'm like, no, the minute you tell me you understand me, I don't think we're connected. But the minute I hear you say, "Oh, are you feeling this? Are you feeling that? Or is this what's happening for you?" If you're guessing and you're understanding, then I feel like you're actually trying, you're striving to understand and connect with me. And then compassion. If I'm feeling empathy, if I'm experiencing empathy, can I be compelled to respond in a way that contributes to well-being and lessen your suffering? And the thing about pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion, it also can be directed towards ourselves. If I'm pitying myself, I'm not really connecting with what's happening. I'm just feeling sorry for myself. If I'm feeling self-sympathy, I'm becoming aware of my own experience and just saying, "Oh, wow, this is suffering," or maybe it's a positive experience. This is joy. In empathy, I'm trying to understand myself, right? It takes time and experience and a literacy of emotions to actually understand ourselves, right? And then if I'm being self-compassionate, can I act based on how I understand myself? This builds resilience. Self-empathy and self-compassion builds resilience. Empathy and compassion for others builds resilience. So those are skills that and practices that I highly recommend. I want to give a very quick example. If I have a student who is texting in class, if I'm feeling pity on them, I'm just going to say, "Oh my God, that's such a lousy student. I can't believe they're so rude. I can't believe they're doing it." And my response is to sort of push them away. Sympathy with a student texting in class, I might see them texting and I might look at their face and think, "Yes, I wonder how they're feeling. What's going on? I wonder what's so important that they're texting." I'm aware that their attention is divided, that their attention is focused on their texting and not on me. Empathy, I might start to try and guess and try and understand what's going on. I might look at their face and go, "Oh, look at that. Their eyes, the muscles are kind of contracted in their face and it looks like they're not very happy. I wonder if something's going on." Or, I'm guessing. Empathy for another person is always about guessing what's happening for them, right? And maybe that student is texting because something's happening in their family that they have to take care of. Or maybe they're texting because they're bored and they really need to have a sense of joy and entertainment. So they're doing something that's bringing them joy. Maybe they're texting because they're getting a message from their work and wherever they're working, and that they really have to take care of that. Based on whatever I'm guessing, I might choose to act compassionately. Maybe the compassionate thing is to make sure I'm not in pity and judgment of them. Or maybe the compassionate thing is just say, "Hey, do you mind just turning off your, like if it's online, do you mind muting? Or if it's in the classroom, I might say, "You just mind stepping outside the classroom for a minute? Or do you need something?" Maybe the compassionate thing is to ask them what's happening and what they need, right? But if I know what it is that I'm trying to do, am I trying to sympathize? Am I trying to empathize? Am I trying to be compassionate? Or am I actually in pity and judgment? Then as a professor, I can make some intentional choices about how I interact with my students, right? That's going to help all of us build resilience. We have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to skip through some of the activities for this. They are here, they're useful, they've been proven to be useful. I highly recommend, if it's an area you want to explore, take a look at these slides, try some of these activities out. and there's a few, I put 3 organizations here. The first one is Kristen Neff's website about self-compassion. She is one of the core main researchers out there on self-empathy and self-compassion, and she has amazing resources for us, as well as she's written a few books, and she's done a lot of research, and she shares on both the sort of the researcher level as well as sort of the general public level. The Center for Holding Space is a place that I work at also, and we teach a particular way of being in relationship with people when people are going through change and transition, which is actually all of us all the time. It's called Holding Space. And if you're interested in learning more about that, there's a link there. And then the last one is the Center for Nonviolent Communication. And they do a lot of intentional work on building up empathy and teaching empathy and compassion skills. The 5th skill to build resilience is mindfulness and meditation, which is a word that 15 years ago wasn't as common as it is now, but I think it's pretty common now. Mindfulness is paying attention to your experience in real time with kindness and curiosity. That's my favorite definition of it. Can I show up here and can I pay attention to my experience, both inner towards myself and outer towards you and others, with kindness and curiosity? Because I'm so trained to judge on everything all the time. So that would be the question. Can I show up with kindness and curiosity and be present and in a way that I'm not judging? There's a ton of resources about mindfulness out there. And so I'm going to skip through fairly quickly. There's a couple of great activities here that I also have. If you're interested in practicing some, I highly recommend them. I'm just going to skip through them because I want to get to the last one, which is forgiveness. I also want to share this resource here. The Fetzer Institute has a beautiful free resource online about compassion, forgiveness, and love. And you can download these cards online. They have them in multiple languages if you're using different languages. And they're cards that have a nice quote on one side, and they have some guides for ways to use them. But even in any course that I'm teaching, I could have a quote of the day from one of these topics, or pull a card, just one quote. That will help students build resilience by thinking about it, by talking about it, by becoming aware of it. So the question would be, like, in your class, do you move sometimes beyond just the content and into the human that's processing and receiving and learning the content? And how, when do you want to bring that up? And this is a free, simple tool that could bring up some really interesting experiences. I use these cards. I'm going to give you an example. I sometimes teach with a labor union in the United States. We do a training we teach the instructors that teach construction skills. They teach how to build huge walls, how to take care of anthrax, how to build roads, how to keep safe. I mean, they do all these things. We use these cards with those instructors. In a session, we took 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes, they talked more about those 10 minutes than some of the other things that we worked on, because in those 10 minutes, they had a chance to connect some kind of deeper wisdom to their lives. And so sometimes it's that kind of resilience that I might not think is really my responsibility, because I'm teaching cybersecurity. I'm going to take Mark's. I'm going to teach you cybersecurity, but you're also teaching ethics, right? You were talking about that, teaching ethics, and this kind of work comes up in our ethics world. So I just want to offer that as an interesting resource, and I can imagine that it might be of use. So that's in the resources as well. There are a couple of interesting organizations about contemplative practices in higher education that if you're feeling called to learn more about this mindfulness and being present and contemplative and how that can be woven into how you're teaching, these are some great resources. And I left a list of some of the resources here as well for mindfulness and contemplation. The last skill, we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I'm just going to quickly mention this, is forgiveness. Forgiveness builds resilience in a way that is, at least in my personal life, has been so profound. And again, not something we think about talking about in the classroom so much, but it's an interesting question that we have for ourselves, myself as a professional, as well as what is it that my students might be experiencing? And whether it's conflict or whether it's they have to forgive themselves for something they hadn't done to help them move forward. But I think forgiveness can be a really powerful area to explore. In the slides, I mentioned 4 different kinds of forgiveness: pushing through and moving forward, right? Just really pushing. So when I forgive somebody, I just say, I forgive you, and I move forward. I don't really explore it. The second kind of forgiveness is a kind of retribution. If the guilty person pays, then I feel okay and I move forward. It's the third and the fourth kind of forgiveness that transform us. Genuine curiosity and empathetic understanding. When forgiveness is based in that, then we both get to learn something. And radical forgiveness, where we look at how what is happening in our roots that needs healing in both of us or in all the people involved in the situation. And then there's a really powerful transformative type forgiveness that can happen. So beginning to learn about forgiveness, practicing different kinds of forgiveness. And I've got some slides in here that talk about each of these 4 different kinds of forgiveness. So you can look at these slides, you can have a copy of them. Is a way to build resilience, and especially the third and the fourth kind of forgiveness definitely build an incredible resilience. So there's an example of cultivating forgiveness, and then some resources for learning and practicing forgiveness. The work that we're doing, this resilience, is about well-being, and I want to share with you just this community well-being framework that looks at cultural, political, social, environment, and economic areas. And there's a link here to this framework. And if we look at these areas and we work on community well-being, our individual resilience will be supported and our community resilience will be supported. So I want to offer that also as a resource for you all to think about and consider this framework and how it might serve you as individuals, as well as a community of professors at Westcliff University. So we have a minute left in the hour, but I'm happy to stay a little bit longer too. I'm curious about how you are. I want to thank you for the time together. Do you have what are you taking from the session, and how are you thinking about, or what are you thinking about for feeling about resilience and empathy?